Hi, everybody. It's Sarah DeHaven, and I have Michael Tsarion here. We're going to talk today about the Imperial Self. This is a topic that has been I've heard. Well, personally for me, I've heard it first through Michael, and the word imperial really stood out to me. It's interesting because along my path in life, since hearing it and having it kind of stand out to me like giant neon letters when I first heard it through Unslaved with Michael, it's been popping up here and there throughout my life. And it's brought me to a point where, as somebody who's very focused on truth and individuation, I'm at a point now where I'm realizing what that really means, and the sacrifices that are involved with that. And so today, me and Michael are going to chat a bit about our perspective on that, maybe what we've learned, whatever else we'd like to share, and we'll share that with you. So, Michael, I'd just like to start and maybe just see what your thoughts are on how you're feeling about the Imperial Self, maybe what you'd like to talk about as far as how you feel about where you're at in your journey, or anything you'd like to really start with.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, the term actually, I was using it for many, many years. I think it might be something that Arno Gruen, the great psychologist, had used, but there was, if ever there was a source for it, it sure was just one source and used very, very infrequently. But at that time, I had been trying to, distinguish, because remember, you also have to factor in the Eastern guys who don't credit the ego or the self, either one or both. And so anyone who's focused on explaining the Western tradition outside of any Eastern complexion really does need to focus on both the ego and the self. But then when you do that, I thought that the term Imperial Self helps to underline selfhood. Because when you use ego and self, just in terms of grammar, they're often considered the same. So here are just a couple of the pitfalls for the beginner who just starts off. For goodness sake, you've got barely the key in the door. You're going to investigate these things and you're only tripping over problems and inconsistencies and contradictions. So I just didn't, feel that without emphasizing or underlining selfhood, that anyone would really sort of cognate that this is different from egohood. And it's not, it is a sort of a value judgment that the self is something greater, just in the same way that conscience is greater than a superego or learned ethics of the world, which is a contrivance. Morality and conscience are not contrivances learned from mom and dad or anything like that. It's something deeper inside. So in my work, conscience and selfhood are the same, really.
Yeah, and I'm with you 100%. In my own work as well, I've come to that conclusion, and we've walked fairly different paths. For me, I came across this from some serious hard knocks that made me realize what the importance of conscience and morality are from within ourselves. And so it was kind of like I almost feel like there's a part of us that's intrinsic to us that wants us to come to realize that, because it's intrinsic to us, these components that are imperative to crafting the Imperial Self. And we can only really connect to those, at least from what I can tell, by disconnecting from the collective consciousness and coming back to nature. As you put it when we last talked, I'm really starting to understand from my own perspective what coming back to nature really means. And that's to me, at least, coming back to the body and really listening to it and trusting that it has intelligence that goes far beyond what the collective consciousness, which is quite sick from what I can tell, would have us believe.
Oh yes, body and nature, they're one, really. Obviously, they constitute the Umwelt, which is nature in German psychological parlance. And you can't get to nature without your body, because the closest thing to you, mind is not connected to nature. Concepts aren't connected to nature. It's much more earthy than that. Mm-hmm. And you're quite right. Coming back to the body, to listen to its intelligence, to factor in its feelings. The basis of thought, right down beneath thought, is feeling. What a simple humdrum word we have for something of such monumental importance to consciousness. Mm-hmm. But Carl Jung, his last book, by the way, which I recommend people get, is called The Earth Has a Soul. And he wrote that when he himself was a retired, more than retired, he was a bloody hermit. He didn't see anybody. He didn't open the door to anybody except his closest friends. And he lived in Lake Bollingen like a hermit in a stone house, a tower, and he carved, huge blocks of stone. And, he was like sort of the mad hermit, not this great eminent psychologist who, and all of this. And so there he was doing in his own life what he would have called an individuation, which is, of course, not a incident or an incident. It is a process. So going to nature is not just going to nature, it's the way in which you go to nature. So this is missing, because a lot of people go tree hugging and all this nonsense, and bungee jumping and all. Going to nature, I mountain bike every day, Michael. What are you talking about? It's not about, recreation in nature, pumping it till it hurts, which is what you see. Headphones, walking the dog, Walkmans, listening to the news, they're not in nature. I mean, I observe it every day outside, my windows. So that's not going to nature in any sense that is authentic. Going to nature is one of the greatest transformative, individuating processes, and makes getting out of the crowd easier because you're actually physically doing it. It's not a mental, well, you sit down and do some calculus. How am I going to, I'm not answer my phone calls, and how am I going to avoid the collective? You avoid the collective by going to the very thing that is polar opposite to it, which is the natural world, as much as possible. One doesn't do that fanatically either, because that's a reaction to the collective. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work. Reactions are pathological and neurotic, right? And this is the danger of dealing with selfhood. The Imperial Self is a kind of, if you really unpack it, it is a manner in which, it's the process in which you're trying to deal with unconscious content, be it personal unconscious content, in the Freudian sense, or the deeper collective unconscious forces in the Jungian sense, the mythology over which your personal life flows or lies. That's what you're dealing with. And how you deal with it, what compass you have, will then characterize your individuation process, and even impact the success or failure of it. Because look at Jung, that red book that everybody thinks is so marvelous, that is his sign of not making it. He did make it, but it almost didn't. And the red book is his journey through psychosis. William Blake had it. The man who's locked up in a cell to be shot by the Nazis, like Thomas Mann the next day, who's a great man, a kind of a C.S. Lewis, he goes through it in a couple of hours. And right now one would argue that, the rest of the human race is sort of negotiating it in some sort of unconscious way. But the point being that any kind of individuation must be understood as a process by which you are negotiating not only your personal demons or personal unconscious, but something perhaps even much more ancient than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think about like archetypes, for instance, which would be Jung's territory. And, I've come across in my travels, there's two individuals, Sonika and Naveed Asif. They're actually younger individuals, but I got to tell you, the generation that was born around 1990 with a conjunction of Uranus and Neptune and Capricorn, they really kind of get the concept of self-determination. The ones that are very sincerely seeking, and these two, they've taken the archetypes and kind of consolidated them into four. That really show the core wounds, I guess you could say, or at least hone in that direction of the four core wounds of humanity, individually and collectively. And that would be the child, the prostitute, the victim, and the saboteur. And it's interesting because if you look at these four archetypes, you can pinpoint where each one of us individually and collectively are enmeshed in what I would say are distortions of our raw potential, where if we had that ability, and we do have the ability at all times, but I mean, when a lot of us aren't taking advantage of that because we're just ignorant to it. But if we took the time, I guess is a better way to put it, to insulate, to seal off from feedback from the outer world and get the feedback from our body, we would get these codes, I guess you could say, of the pure versions of these archetypes and be able to function a lot more healthily in the world. But right now what we're seeing is a lot of victim mentality, a lot of like far into the the brain, like just the logical faculty, to the point where it's so scientific, but not even really. They're all distortions. But like even the people in the New Age and spirituality movements, there's a lot of as much as they would say that they are introspective beings, it's, as you say, they could be out hugging trees and languishing by the ocean, I don't know, and have no concept of the deep trauma, because I mean the whole species is deeply traumatized, and a part of that is because for so long, I don't know how far back it goes really, we have each not seen that we had the choice to individuate into that imperial self, whether through ignorance or fear or refusal or denial. And then at the end of the day, as far as I see it, it is the choice. We always have the choice to individuate. But man, does it ever require a level of courage that, I mean, not to go off on a tangent here, but I mean, that fear can be a real scary illusion, that fear that it's not okay to be who it is we are. And yet that's literally why we're in the situation we're in right now as a species. We've been backed into a corner, right? Like we have to grow up. That's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Jung himself, because you talked about the 4 archetypes there, and I'm totally fascinated, but I never heard of that before, and it immediately jumps out as true. And Jung had pointed out that the solution to the voluminous work that he had done, seeing all these patients in various forms of neurosis and fear, all the 9 yards, not only of his generation, but he had comments to say about our generation, all of this, and the horrendous, sort of the horrendously difficult and fear-ridden process. Individuation was his solution. Because here's a man who's writing endlessly on the problem. And one would then say, well, come on, Carl, you're the one who sees all the people, and you've been through the nut houses all over the world, from Switzerland to France and everywhere else. You've seen all the raving loonies there. I mean, come on, what's the solution to all of this social, and what is, you keep on stressing what humanity's problems are, and you speak of it in a psychological way. You're, showing that even scientists of the top level can be kind of crazy and all of this stuff, the pestilence is everywhere. What's your solution? And he just turned around and said, individuation. And then went on to explain what that is. And also then what hampers individuation, like out of those 4 archetypes, child and saboteur. Yeah, child and parent. Parent in the latter definition of the saboteur, that takes away the childhood of the child. The child is immediately under attack by the great twin peaks that tower over him, right? There's no archetypes. You want to bet? Right? There's childhood for all of 5 seconds, and then it's some imposition, it's some jumping through hoops, it's the immersion in the crowd right from the moment of the parents, because the parents are steering you in that direction. They're not steering you towards any individuality. So the collective becomes a factor as soon as you're born, through mother and father who are so immersed in the collective, and then the peers and the friends and all the rest of it, that there could be, not only society in the past hadn't got the subjectivity or even the freedom to choose whether they want the individual or not. In fact, they had and when we did have the choice historically, we chose not to have it. When it was explained what it means to be an individual, no, don't want that. Let's head down the pub, lads. And you can see that today, atavistically. Today, when we see the sports arenas just jam-packed, hundreds of thousands of billions of people turning out for Hillary, turning out for the game. Women marching in the streets recently over the abortion thing, but you couldn't get even a quarter or tenth of those women out for any actual real important cause, for child trafficking or animal cruelty or the other horrors of our life, or the destruction of the Western world. Shit, you wouldn't even get 2.5 people out there, but millions can march on some relatively fucking meaningless thing. But it activated them on the archetypal level. That abortion story activated something within them. That's the demon, right? It activated the collectivistic urge, and then something even more primordial than that, women's rights. And it would be the same if men went for their rights. Right? What are you talking about, rights? Right? Where's all this mythology come from? Where do all these atavistic ideas come from? So his word individuation meant a process that said, right, with the word individual or individuation implies a differentiation from any collective factors. Okay, well, that's a tall building growing upwards that I get that, Michael. It's the I, it's the one who stands like Howard Roark, separate and individual and artistic and creative. It says, my world is my own. Everybody's going through that today with, are you going to get this and you aren't going to get that handout from the government? And are they going to pollute your body? Are they going to, violate your sovereignty on a physical, biophysical level? So these questions are always with us and always will be. So you go, yeah, I get that. That's differentiation. Yeah, I get the meaning of individuation. But at the same time, anything that grows up, take a sunflower, is still linked in the soil of that which it emerged from. Mm-hmm. Don't think that differentiation means split. You're still connected to that mass, to the collective unconscious, except that there's some ego development that's grown out of it, and that's a good thing. In fact, Jung, as I just said, doesn't suggest, he emphasizes that that is the way to deal with all neurosis and pathology, whether it's on a social or personal level. But the flower is growing out of that which it sort of wants to get away from. So there's some weird bivalence then. There's some weird ambiguity and ambivalence about the whole process. I'm growing out, but I'm growing up, but I'm not really growing out of the thing. Right, so that's symbiosis. In the great work that he did on symbols of transformation, it answers this big question. You are growing up towards the light and the sun, but your roots are still in the soil, and therefore you always will be, unless you're psychotic, and that's what psychosis is. It's a stupid attempt to in some way disown your own roots. And then you end up, medicated or in the hospital, or I'm depressed, doctor, have major issues and whatever. And most of the time, a brilliant, pathologist like him or somebody like Otto Rank, tremendously perceptive, starts looking at you and understands something extraordinary. And that is the pathology that you come in with, or the neurosis you come in with is inner conflict. And that inner conflict, then if it fails or it's not guided correctly or you don't understand it correctly, you'll be driven out into the streets in order to see if there's other people there. It's like a sadomasochist. It's exactly a perfect example of what I'm saying, because sadomasochist implies actually a dyad of a sadist and a masochist. Right? The masochist couldn't find power in himself. He looked and looked and looked through all of his teenage years, and thanks to mom and dad, power was non-existent. So what does the masochist do? Gets online and finds a sadist, or goes to a class in which there's a sadist at the front of the class, or goes and finds a boss. There is a boss from hell, right? Because look, if I don't have the power in me, there's only one next step to where I can be near power, since power, the will to power, is the ultimate drive in people down below. Not the ultimate drive, but a very, very important psychic drive. And I do have to have it. But then I find I don't possess it. The only next thing to do is to be in the company of one, to marry one, to sleep with one, to work for one, to believe in one, right? Allah, to believe in Jesus, right? I have to be near power. That's my second best. I'm sure that friend of mine there, he's got the power. That's why I'm actually in the presence of power. So that kind of dyad is what we walk around with every day. And the biggest one is, what do I do to disconnect from the collective unconscious, which causes me a lot of problems, but is the root of my entire being and is the root of everybody else's being? Yeah. So this is where everything came to an impasse, and Jung had his own suggestions, about how to resolve it.
Yeah, it totally, and I think Jung was just he really understood the core concepts of what was really going on. Because I mean, if you even distill what you've said down, it sounds to me like child mentality, victim mentality. It's, they did this to me. I am not strong enough to stand up for myself. And then it goes into the whole prostitute, which means I have to do this to earn a living, and it's just, it really is, you're kind of writing your own death warrant. And that's the thing. It's self-accountability is so huge for this. And it's not easy to look at the stuff inside of ourselves that we need to look at in order to purify the aberrations. But it's literally the only way out of this place. It's the only way out. And it's interesting you mentioned the sunflower analogy, because I love this, because the sunflower itself is growing into its own, we could say, divinely coded, individuated form, as it is called to do as a being. It grows into its own form, and yet it is still connected to the collective. And as humans, to me, I can be idealistic, right? But at the same time, I do think it's very logical, basically logical too, to see that the individual person needs to grow into their inherent coded form, the way it was meant to be, as purified and cleanly as possible, so that it can give back to the collective instead of just leaching nutrients out of the soil and then leaving the soil barren of anything, you know? And this is why diversity is so important as well. And yet we do see that cycle of how parents propagate the sickness onto their children, and so on and so on and so on. So that's why at the end of the day, as much as, and you know, I had to deal with some pretty rough upbringing straight out of the gate, so to speak. So I get it. And yet at the same time, it's always down to the choice. You know, what are we going to do?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the prostitute, for me, again, fits the parents. They have prostituted themselves to the ideas that the child knows nothing about. Child doesn't know anything about ideas, ideals, standards, norms. The parents know all about it and have made themselves subservient to it. They're submissive to the world order. They are the collective. And
Yes.
only the parent who then uses these words in the growth of the child, points out this dynamic, not to hate the collective, which is just Mitweld, society, and it can be mastered. Part of the individuation process is to know the difference, that there's a natural world upon which the social world sits. Without the underlying natural world, there can be no human society. So a child who's discerning that, then maybe the next thing is to show how desecrative the society is toward nature. That's a horrible thing to introduce to a child, but it's fatal if you don't. Then upon the social comes the individual. So there are benign ways, softer ways to define, just like you would in art, what an individual is, to get a sort of a profile of it. And then you leave lots and lots of room for the child to grow into its own understanding. One of the things that parents do, even well-meaningly, is talk so much about it in the verbal sense that they cloud the growth of the child's own moving into it and taking space, to move into what it is. The parent must be careful. Just show models, sketch out the basic thing, and then introduce the superego and the image ideal to great heroes, the Robin Hoods, the Aslan and C.S. Lewis, and I can share, you could Sherlock Holmes, you could name many, Bruce Lee. The list is endless, and then hope that will already fortify the child that you want to work in your society as a social entity, but you don't want to support its violations, where the line is, and all of that, and just to fortify and to then use the work of the great masters that are out there. I consider this key to individuation is we don't know anything yet, but our forefathers did, and they were the geniuses, so let's read their work. So in my little articles, little posts on the blog and all, I'm always trying to, especially these forgotten, there's a certain bevy of great minds who are actually not being forgotten. And therefore I try to make sure that, they're referenced. So at least people, and then there are bona fide post-Jungians like Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden who have completely, dedicated their lives to these points we're making. They're actually written the manuals, even one step further. They've also written them in a modern idiom. So there's no excuse for anyone out there not to know, okay, if you don't understand some German philosophy and psychology, I get it. But there are people who lived in the late 20th century, wrote specifically on self-esteem, wrote specifically on the negatives of crowd consciousness. And we need to be up on all of their work. All of their work we need to be aware of. And that's the good thing. You can email people books, you can read them yourself, and you can send them on to people that you care about. And those, because we're not in a desert of total darkness. In fact, anybody who says, yes, we are, Michael, yeah, but it's because you haven't read these people. It's because you don't listen to the Arno Gruens and the Ayn Rands and all of the people that I mentioned in my work, that then there's a sea of madness and a sea of darkness out there. That's because you haven't done the requisite homework, and the situation will continue that way. So you will be ruled by predators. You'll be ruled by demons in human guise. I mean, you just have to actually physically look at the faces of these George Soroses and George Bushes and whatever else you've got to know that these are despicable people who have just aggrandized. They've satiated their basest desires in the foulest of ways. They're being sensational beings, and then in many ways they are not only the saboteurs of any kind of logic and logical people and goodly people, but they're also prostitutes to the dark force. And they're children in the infantile state, meaning they're purely sensation. They're just sensation people with a very high IQ. But their dominant motive is dinner parties, gluts, yachts, babes, chicks, boys, whatever it is. It's just satiate, satiate, satiate. And they've just got a load of power, and they've got a load of control. And we've handed them the power. So again, you know, the human race needs to realize it has the power. But it doesn't want to use it. Just in past ages, in the Middle Ages, nobody wanted individualism. That looked like something utterly detestable when it first flickered on the screen. And then some scholars argue that about 3,000 years BC, which is actually not a very long time, there was no subjectivity to speak of at all. Individuality was completely not even the word. We have earned that through thick and thin. And these youngs kind of agree. They don't get into the dates. They think that's a kind of a moot point. But and I agree. But the fact of the matter is, what we call individualism, or the freedom to choose, was granted to us by our masters, right? And this, of course, then opens up another dynamic that is still in our world today. We're still waiting for the masters to grant us this level of sovereignty or that level of freedom or this utopian nonsense that they love to wave in front of us. We're not picking up the choice that is sovereign, you know, inalienable rights. If the Constitution of any country says you have unalienable rights, then there must be even something more pure and free behind that. So we can get to that stage of somebody to declare that you human beings have an inalienable. Yeah, that does not where it starts. It starts with a deeper grasping and sensibility of ultimate freedom below that. But do we read the writers who talk about that ontological freedom and where it comes from and how you know? No, we pillory them. We say, oh, they're obscurantists, they're proto-fascists. Look what they're talking about, you know, or they're individualists and egoists. We have a whole bevy of alphabet soup to demonize anyone who really wants to anatomize and get down to the roots of what human freedom is and why we don't have it, the real thing in the world, but we got plenty of the fake version.
Oh man, do we ever? That's for sure. There's no question about that. It's real interesting when I think about these people, like you mentioned, these families and these dynasties as well, that we would say, well, I mean, they call themselves, well, I don't know what they call themselves, but we call them like the elites and the ruling class. Me personally, I don't call them those things because I'm not going to bestow that title onto them. But I just want to share something interesting with you that I've come across in my journey. I swear to God, it's like I have an invisible hand that kind of leads me through, and I just come across information in the most interesting way. And so these two individuals, the guy's name Alejandro Ferrades and his partner's name is Elena Bensonoff. And these two people are using scalar wave technology based on David Hawking's work. They're using a scalar wave technology to measure the vibrational frequencies of people. I've been subscribed to them for almost a year now, listening to all of their frequency revelations on a variety of people, and they are scarily accurate. And recently they did some readings on some of the elite, quote unquote, elite bloodlines. And of course, there's no surprise. A lot of these people vibrate on some very messed up, we would say, apathetic, exploitative, and murderous frequencies. Like they're clearly disgusted with humanity. But one of the interesting things that they kept coming up with when they were doing these readings on these families are they're in 100% in their divine purpose. So there's a purpose to these people in the collective. And I dare say that their purpose, as disgusting as it is, the atrocities that a lot of these families partake in that we won't get into, but I know you're aware of it. These things that they're doing, I feel like it's to get us to stop saying, they did this to me. It's for us to see what we can do in this piddly existence that we call like this iteration of life, you know? It's kind of, when you think about it, I mean, it really shows the interesting concept of our insignificance and yet our value in the sense that we can contribute, but yet we're also kind of like we're priceless and we're worthless at the same time, I guess, you know, humans. And yet, you know, it's so I guess when I was younger, like one of the things I declared was I want to learn what these assholes running the planet know, because they know something we don't. And along my journey, I've just been realizing that it's almost like they live in a parallel dimension, you know. It's like they and as do we all. We're all living kind of like parallel to each other. And when I think about these families, and I swear to God, I'm pretty sure I have a point with this. I apologize, but these families, I do think, are playing out a role, and it's almost like for us to create a world that is completely possible. You know, the word utopia automatically, etymologically, I believe it even means like an impossible kind of ideal, but we could create something very beautiful, but it does require what Jung was saying. We need to individuate, and that's where it's at. You know, and then I just one other thing I wanted to say, maybe we can touch on this next, is the concept of the feminine and the masculine and the gross distortions that we see in that playing out right now, both in men and in women. It seems almost like we flipped, where women are kind of forcibly playing a role that is not inherent to our biology, which is the masculine. This is something I deal with myself, having Mars in the seventh house. You know, I was born very aggressive, we'll say. So I know this personally, but women across the board were kind of playing out this masculine role, not being submissive like we're kind of meant to be. Sorry, ladies, anyone that's hearing this and doesn't like that, it's true. That's the role we're here to play. And then the men are going beta. You know, you've talked about this yourself quite extensively. But yet, from what I can tell, this is part of the individuation process too, is to clean up our inner relationship and thus our outer relationship to how we express our masculine and feminine. And of course, everyone has both, but if biologically, depending on whether you're a male or female, there's going to be one that's predominant in how it's, what is predominant in the sense of what is to be expressed through us. And so for women, that's more submissive. And for men, it's more provider action oriented, at least my perspective on that. I'm wondering what you think, Michael.
Yeah, great. The first part about these maniacs is that they are sadomasochistic. This will help people understand a lot. And even about the relevance of the divine. In order to gauge pathology, don't you have to have a standard or a mean, I suppose you would call it? Just think of it as a gauge. And that gauge is the divine, is the divine fulcrum. So everyone is connected to the divine, even the foaming mad dog sadist, you know, that should hang, you know, by noon. That creature is only, in order for anyone to judge that he is antisocial and sadistic, one needs a judge and a sort of a template. And so that's the divine, if one wants to use that word. It's fine to use it. What it really is the point, the still point of equilibrium by which the good and the evil, you know, can be discerned from one another. And they, without that divine center point, without that judge, that Solomon, well, then David Rockefeller can't be discerned from a Caravaggio cannot be distinguished from a Cervantes or whoever, a Van Gogh. You know what I mean? It just becomes a big glob. So there is this sort of a divine fulcrum in the universe that allows us then to grasp, even if our grasping of it is on a pathetic level. You're totally right there, but at least, you know, objectively that standard exists, and we use it ourselves. Again, it's like a manifestation of the conscience. When you just damn well know in your heart that you shouldn't have said that or done that to somebody who didn't deserve it, you know. I wish the internet trolls had that fulcrum, but of course they don't, and that's too bad, you know. And again, just a little anecdote again about that is I don't serve humanity. I'm not really that concerned about humanity at all. I serve the truth and the men of the truth and the women of the truth of the past. Like I said, the Ayn Rands. I just have a very functional workaday overalls, you know, type of attitude of the guy in the basement, you know, twiddling around with it in the dark with the gauges, you know, and the incinerator. It's a very workaday attitude I have to try and keep the window clean, you know, so that people can look in and see the things that are on display. That is for their help. But I have no interest in opening the door for them or guiding their hands to pick up whatever book it is. The glass there is the freedom to walk on by or say, hey, that looks interesting, what's that? But then coming to this other point that you made about the men and the women, you see, Jung would say, I mean, everybody knows it's gone wrong, so there's almost no point, that's almost redundant to go into, you know, what needs to happen is that there needs to be a deeper look at why it went wrong. And to do that, America will never do it. That's where it stops right there. America is we're part of an anti-psychological age in which we are not even vaguely interested in opening those corridors and going down to look at what is male and female, masculine and feminine. when I used to do a lot of talks all around the world, and I had to sit there and listen to a lot of other speakers, I don't remember one speaker, and some of these people are really eminent, like you shake when you have to shake their hand, they're degreed, they're eminent. Most of them were pretty sour, especially to people like me, but I never ever even heard one of them get it right when they were using terms like masculine and feminine and male and female. And one time, this was at a conference in Bath, England, I actually confronted this guy, completely cordially. We were out walking around. I walked up to him and I said, yeah, did you, I can't even remember what I said. It was about 2010. I said, when you were talking about male and female, we were talking about masculine and feminine because they're very different things. And he just looked at me like, you little oik, what the fuck? Why are you even critiquing what I said? So I just went, okay, that was the first and last time. So here is a superficial knowledge. It's not animated by any real knowledge of the subject at all, right? And again, to give it one of the larger context is, there is no such thing as masculine and feminine in a true sense, unless, as you said earlier on, you have grasped the archetypal aspect of it, which takes you to people's work like Jung. And so just give a little sketch of what Jung would talk about. And believe me, this is still a very minor, iteration of it. It isn't the masculine and feminine, like all other upper structure traits. After you've differentiated, we have reason, we have, conscience and superego. We've got masculine and feminine. We've got introvert and extrovert. And all of these divisions and dyads, and why there's even dyads is a fascinating story. But let's bypass that for now. In the upper structures, whatever is the architecture of our consciousness is rooted below. So the real understanding of masculine and feminine is comportments based on, again, the lower strata, which is our collective unconscious. The feminine grows out of it and then reflects back, and the masculine is a comportment toward it. It's where the stories of the chivalric male, like St. George killing the dragon, and the chivalric male and the damsel in distress tied up against the tree, right? It's where all these mythological iterations of masculine and feminine come from. Then we lose contact with that, and that's bad, because the things are now going to start going real fuzzy as we move to the upper structures, and that's what's happened. Here we are in the upper world of the conscious ego, and of course the thing is already warped down below because we've lost our mythological ground, and the West has lost it completely. That's why I can qualify when I say we'll never get it, because the damage done to Western culture through these multiculturalists and critical theorists is more damaging than people could ever imagine. Nobody has an idea of what they've done and how bogus what their own philosophies are. But we see the result of it. We see the dumpster trucks, just trashing everything that our forebears created. And one of them is sexuality and gender understanding. And because it was broken already below, these Frankfurt School guys had a little bit of an edge on us. Quite, Marcuse and these people. They realized that it had been cracked, and they took full advantage of it. So they didn't create it, but they ran with it, and they knew that it'll be quite easy to dislodge even your stereotypical male-female stuff on the top, because the archetypal masculine feminine dynamic below is already sort of off kilter and warped. It was only a matter of time. And somebody could argue, again, dates, who cares about dates, right? But somebody could track this to Shakespeare's time. Somebody could trace it back to the Romantic era, the chivalric era, the troubadour tradition, this Tristan and Isolde romantic nonsense where they're drinking poison in order to fall in love with each other, and all this beautiful ancient iterations of this dynamic. So it could go very, very, very far back. You could take it into Gnosticism and talk about the Demiurge, and Sophia, or just say, no, look, this is all something of the 20th century when things got really, really bad. So that's all different subject. But what has happened is, because the orientation to the collective unconscious, the deeper strata, is broken, how can you expect the chess pieces on the board to have any kind of structure? They're just rolling around, it's rolling, and that's what we're seeing is the relativism, as they now use that word in so many disingenuous ways.
Yeah, they do. They do. Yeah, sorry. Did you have more to say? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, then we would go off another direct. You see, then we get into, it's well, the only other direction to take it again then is, as I do in Dragon Mother and Adultism, where I hone in on the mother-child relationship, the mother-daughter, where we talk about matrophobia. Of course, the male child is highly involved in that. And then you're getting into the Oedipus complex and Electra complex, and I flushed those out for people to really get And this time, and unlike Jung and Freud, who didn't look at the woman at all, I do. I actually look at the dynamic of the mother and the, specifically, and the generation of matrophobia and her form of adultism. Because since the female is the great mother who breeds all the men, well, then we don't need to really be looking at male psychology. And that's why the feminists did. The feminists want to move the entire vision, entire study of pathology to male world, and they've done it. The small elite coterie funded by some very dark lodges in the world, they don't mean well for women. Let's just get that real clear. But they just use this ruse to focus the entire attention on the masculine. So I just said, well, let's go back and, wait a minute. Since all women breed and raise the men of the world and make them into the horrors that they are, let's look at the seedbed. Let's look at the horror of the adultism of the female. And let's look at all girls' hatred toward their own mothers, i.e. matrophobia, and anatomize that. And that then becomes far more interesting than any gender dynamics, of masculine and feminine. This is the real, crux. And to prove it is true, just ask how many other people are doing it in the whole of America. All these PhDs, you came from Princeton, Harvard. Yeah, oh my God, you're great feminist, triple PhD. Yeah, but I can't find one of you who actually deals with this crucial problem, which means then that the problem must be very, very important. If all the intellect, if all the academics in the world don't want to touch it, my mind says, that's it, you found it.
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating, obviously. You have your Phyllis Schlafly's and you have your Julia Kristevas, but they still are technically feminists. They still hold on to a very man-hating, female supremacy thing. But God love them, there's some fantastic work. Barbara Creed, people I cover all the time, who are from the inner world of feminism. Because remember, if you attack it from the outside, you're just looked at as some Genghis Khan. What I try to do is find within their own coterie brilliant thinkers who have looked at the weakness of the struts and don't support the full venom of a gynocracy. A little bit more liberal women who are they're still somewhat sane, and they have amazing things to say about the whole idea of matrophobia and all of that. So people will find that on my articles in Dragon Mother and in the Dragon Mother book. Some fantastic revelations there. So that brings it to a practical, as opposed to a very abstract, hey, masculine and feminine concepts people can understand. Lots of men have feminine traits and can be very artiste when they're young. What's wrong with that? It's brilliant. A lot of women can be very forceful and aggressive and masculine, and that's a good thing. You see, so there's lots of blurred areas and people lose the thread.
Yeah, they definitely do. And like, as you said, I just want to bring this up. You were talking about going back to the root of the issue, which is who is breeding the people, the mother, right? That's huge. That is a huge revelation. And you're quite right. That's why I was laughing, is just, when you find the answer, the collective is going to get very upset, because part of what the collective's pathology is that they're mired in shadow. And where is the shadow originating from? From the feminine, right? Like, it literally is from the feminine, because the feminine informs the masculine how to act, the masculine in themselves and the masculine, that they breed, right? Yeah. So yeah, it is very much rooted to that. And it's interesting, like, also everyone who's listening, if you haven't read Dragon Mother, you definitely want to do that. Pick it up for sure. It is worth the read and then some. I just wanted to say the concept of dragon is quite interesting too, because dragons, when I remember one of my first questions to you actually was, is a dragon mother an entirely bad thing? And you corrected my perspective on that and explained it quite clearly and eloquently, and when I think about the collective is afraid of dragons. They want to slay and kill dragons. And yet, I dare say that that a true dragon mother is something to be revered, and that would be, in my opinion, at least from what I can see, a mother who has her feminine and masculine intact, a mother that can also, like Ceres or Demeter, learn to let go of their children and allow them to go through the underworld, to go through their rites of passage and become adults. This is huge. This is part of the individuation process. Although, like I was saying earlier, yes, it's down to our choice. And a lot of us, far later in life than we should be, are realizing that we do have the choice, myself included. Instead, in a more, I would say, natural and healthy environment, the mother would be preparing the child for individuation and allowing the child to be let go of at the right time. This is why the Montessori method is so great, right? Because it's literally literally learning how to coach your child into becoming who it is they're here to be based on observing them rather than trying to control them.
Yeah, yeah. Those schoolings are very good. I myself come from a Steiner Krishnamurti background where at least they make the effort, to do exactly what you're saying. Remember the first projection of an infant, arguably even before birth, but certainly in the first moments after birth and the coming period, there's a projection of the child's identity onto the mother. The mother is the holder, keeper, chalice holder of the personality and later character of a child. What they don't want you to know is that that projection occurs, and then it is up to the mother to bestow it back, like a Guinevere kept Arthur's sword. Yeah, and then you hand it back to him during the time and said, this is your manhood. So men are the pathetic creatures they are today because that transfer, the mother acted more like a sorceress, more like a Morgane Le Fay, and didn't give anything back that she should have. She violated the ultimate morality. She wasn't the proper keeper. And therefore, through other, just dynamics that are complicated in her life from her parents, then she failed. Then, of course, that impacts the child and the daughter. And the dynamic there that breaks down is because of envy. The mothers deeply envy and even hate, in certain instances, the growing child, especially a daughter. And the daughter senses it. But being innocent and not knowing how to, and also the mother might cover it over with a lot of treacle and, marzipan, and extra, extra invasion and intrusion into her life for her own good, quote unquote, and seems so loving and motherly and all of that all her real underlying hatreds are all disguised by the topical stuff. But by the time boys and girls become teenagers, the game is usually over. And even on a sort of a non-conscious level, they're reacting. That's where you get the child delinquency and the rebellion of teenage youth. It's all symptomatic of what I'm talking about. But you're quite right. The dragon is just an allusion to the Euroboric or all-encircling mother. We just talked about the violation of that prestige. But the dragon mother is a goodly term of the all-encircling protective mother who is there at the very beginning of the germ of consciousness in her child that couldn't grow without that encirclement, because you'd just be, open to the collective unconscious, the storms and the tides, and you'd be basically drown. So the encirclement, speaking here symbolically, mythologically, is an encirclement in a positive way. And the dragon, anyway, as a symbol, represents that level of omnipotence, right? The wings are for the air, the claws are for the earth, the scales are for the water, and the breath is from the fire. So this is a tremendously positive, ancient archetype going right back to the beginning of all creation, not just human creation. Think of insects, think of cellular life. The mother archetype is the earth in the deepest chthonic sense. So we experience that. If the mother is all messed up in her life and thought she was now going to go and do some breeding, well, then we have problems. And that needs to be remedied then by further education, which is my dedication, in the books and articles on Dragon Mother site. It's the education of women so that there can be some sort of remedy to this dire situation, because they're not just producing, male children who are going to have to experience the Oedipus years or the Oedipus stages. And those are very, very legitimate. Anybody that you hear telling you that those don't exist, mostly they're critical Marxists and feminists who tried to take Freud's works and completely desecrate it, don't believe it. They're very, very, very true stages with modifications. Freud's daughter, of course, I'm not saying there hasn't been embellishments and widening and rectification and revisement. Of course there has. But then you can take it to the Jungian idea. He talked about the Electra complex, where Freud did not talk about the mother-daughter relationship. Jung had more to say about it, but I fault that because he didn't have enough to say. Again, they were so tentative in those days. I don't know what happened. They need to go a lot further. So my work is dedicated to Erich Neumann and Jung and these people, but with the idea that we need to take it forward. For another thing to go back to what you said about masculine and feminine, we talked about the sort of more abstract definition of it from a Jungian point of view. There's also a Reichian point of view that is so vital that we understand in terms of masculine and feminine. It has to do with body armoring. It has to do actually with the whole perception of a body. There's a masculine and a feminine way of regarding your own body. And when it goes wrong, well, then you get the six-pack and the broad shoulders and all that nonsense on the male side. And when it breaks down, you get the overweight and the extreme hatred of the body that you would find and bulimia and anorexia. And on the women's side, both of these are just obscenities, right? And that is because of your relationship with your body. And in one of the podcasts we just did on Unslaved, I went deeply into that, about this, the increased weight gain that's happening is a kind of armoring, amazingly. Because armoring, if you look at the definition of it, it's just what it means. It means a barrier, an armoring in your body, in your, the spastication of the musculature in your own body to keep out a certain thing and to keep out from inside. I know it sounds strange, but it's a block. It's a dike that is to keep out the storms of the external world, meaning the reality principle. More specifically, we want to hold on to our fantasies and childhood, because as you said, one of those 4 archetypes is the child. This is where the child goes the worst, in which, in order to maintain the domination of the pleasure principle, we armor to keep out those, the principles, the reality principle. But the armoring works within as well. A lot of the content within our psyche is considered objective to the ego. These are why these subjects are so incompetently spoken about by almost everyone out there. You've got to understand the key Jungian principle that Reich iterated in a bioenergetic way, that there's content from within, namely, well, make it short, emotion. We block against inner feelings come from our inner core, and they don't get through to the ego either. They don't manage to get through to the surface of the body. And that's why you get these sterile faces today when you're looking at people, just blank fucking stares and nobody home stares. Yeah, that's because the armoring is working on the internal. And then if you go and sit down in front of video games from morning to night because your parents are just wonderful to allow you to do that, or some sadistic pornographic shit that they just love their kids to be involved with, right? Then you'll have the reality principle decimated as well. And what you got in the middle is America. That's where we are, lost in America, lost in the world today. That's the inheritance. That's what we've built for our children.
Yeah, it's kind of when you think about the natal chart for America, it's really not. It's a gross aberration of the potential of what America could have become. And we're coming upon that Pluto return next year, February. We're going to be having the year of the Pluto return of when the U.S. signed the Declaration of Independence. So basically, their first soul's birthday, and yet, we can see what's happening. There's a gross need for purification. Interesting what you said about Wilhelm Reich, and the armoring, and how it connects to the child, and then the blocked feelings from within. So interesting, because when we look at astrology, Cancer, the crab with that hard shell, does represent the lunar side of the child, where Leo would be the solar side. The lunar side is seen through Cancer, and we can, this is why I love astrology. And of course, Jung was big on astrology too, for good reason, turns out. But this is it, right? We can totally lie to ourselves and create a world from within, to the point where we do, even though we're so insulated, we lose complete touch with reality. And as much as I love a good video game, I'm not going to lie, or, whatever, something to read or watch to kind of escape into a fantasy world, it is such a disservice, detriment to the psyche when somebody's already set up for the antithesis of success, as you already described, having parents that are quite pathological, raising these children and then putting them down in front of an escape. And then I think of Pisces, that has no skin, and just absorbing all of that collective gunk, essentially, and becoming completely just putrefied in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Well, we need entertainment. I'm not against that. We definitely need humor and fun. And all of those things are vital. In fact, they may be even our salvation. That doesn't mean laughing everything serious off as well, which America tends to do because of the Jupiterian aspects. At least in my side of astrology, there's a lot of Jupiter, because it used to be exalted in Cancer. So wherever there's Cancer, there's Jupiter. And that can bring levity, which is, we look at our great comedians, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Fatty Arbuckle, and then moving forward through your, Mel Brookses and Woody Allen's, and right up to, Bill Hicks and all of that. So humor is a humongous part. Look at people like, who am I thinking of here? It'll come to me in a second, but that humor is a steam valve that allows people to deal with politically incorrect ideas, and then to have this release. George Carlin, people like that, right?
Yes, yes.
Henry Rollins. So this is so valuable, but at the same time, that can also, as it is now, as you see on Facebook and social media, very, 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 very serious political things are sort of laughed off in these cartoons. I mean, I like them myself, but it doesn't mean that I don't notice the dark side of that. Is sometimes you can laugh off things that actually a country or an individual should be taken deadly seriously, solemnly, and unfortunately there's a pathology there as well. I know that a few other people have noticed that. But again, when you are looking at archetypes, then you realize that the country is mother. I mean, America's even born under the Statue of Liberty. There's a lot of female symbolism, as you quite rightly said. The Cancer and the fourth house are connected to the mother and all of that. So there's a lot of feminine energy in America, and therefore one can sum it up correctly by saying, yeah, this is the great mother as she manifests in socio-political life today. And so many of the things that are going on with these feral children, pulling down the phallic statues, you see, there are legitimate psychological ways, but we're living in an anti-psychological climate, and have been for some time. America has used many, many defenses, what we call postmodernism, and I'm not against it all, by the way. There's some very, very positive. What we're doing right here and now is a form of postmodernist critique. Anytime you're critiquing big government or any impositional authoritarian structure, you are, by definition, a postmodernist. So people, these Jordan Petersons and others, have led a lot of people in the wrong direction by not really going deep enough. He's hopeless on Jung, and pretty much he's hopeless on every subject I've seen. Very, very shallow, and it can be a detriment. We throw up these heroes. Remember, I said it's defense. We throw up certain thinkers. Go, oh, that's great, William James. Oh, over here we got this guy, and over here we got that guy. And many times the very narration, their whole narrative, is actually bogus, to tell you the truth. It's not that it's not without certain value, but it can also be, because where's your freaking Ayn Rands and your Nathaniel Brandons? And they're nowhere to be found. But we have Jordan fucking Peterson giving you the tour.
Ayn Rand would be canceled. He should be canceled so fast. Sorry, please go on. Yeah.
And so, there are issues there about who is thrown up as the spokesman. And I was not very impressed. I came to America 3 times at different periods. And each time when I was watching PBS or watching I couldn't, apart from maybe a Jacob Needleman and, most of what I saw being thrown up there. I love Camille Paglia, by the way. She's a huge, exception to this rule. But apart from 1 or 2 people that were the spokesman, what I'm meant to be listening to this fucking, Pinko, Chris Hedges, or some, what the fuck have you got there? It's like, is communism thinly disguised under socialism and charities and, the brotherhood of man nonsense? Can't anybody in America see through these guys? Or know that other greater people, show hosts and all, like Morton Downey and all, were all wiped out because they were, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditionalist. See, so, and you can't see these things. It takes somebody to come and go a lot from the continent and coming back and can see what's happening to you people. You're being poisoned. And then the only way that you actually can't seem to download it is when it's in humor all the time, humor all the time, humor all the time. That's not good either. That tells me that you're not taking it fucking seriously. And that's why we're in this mess now. Because there'll be a flip side, what's called an enantiodromia, a flowing over to the other side, like one of those, what do they call them, those hourglass things, or whatever. When one side gets top heavy, it flips over and you get the complete diametrical opposite. What it really means is there's no proper equipoise. Life history is still waiting for us to find the balance between antinomies, differences. Well, America fails, mate. It doesn't, you haven't done it. So what does that make then of your academic culture? It renders it null and void. They've left out the very people, namely somebody like a Hegel, whose whole system was based in equipoise and deep harmony, right? You've left them out, or you butchered their work, stole it, and ran off and used it to get your own PhD with a whole dollop of Marxism thrown in just for good measure, right? Yeah, that you've done. That you've done, but you haven't brought in the man's whole teaching, which was designed to show larger groups as well as an individual how to manifest proper synthesis. And the desecration they've done to that man's work is unspeakable. He is literally history's most misinterpreted philosopher. I've done some stuff on Enslaved to correct all of this bullshit, right? But My God, instead of importing his wonderful teachings and applying them, no, we don't have that. We've got, you know, neocons, or we've got Fukuyama, or what the hell, again, distorting the picture of continental thought. They've done this with everyone. And then they promoted absolutely corrupt people like, you know, Jacques Derrida and the deconstructionists. These young men, they gave them the A's. They gave them the degrees and the what do you call it? These honorary degrees. Yeah, because you want the public of America to be reading their work. Recently, a celebrity was shown walking in the street, some nut from Hollywood, some, you know, evil little chick, I can't remember what her name is, some singer, holding up for the camera to see Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto. Now, why would that be? This is just this week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you know that pillock that runs Twitter. What's his name? That fucking goofball with a big beard.
I know who you're talking about, but my brain has just done me a real solid, and I don't remember his name.
Yeah, who wants to remember the bastard's name anyway? Well, anyway, his little sidekick, this fruitcake billionairess, is filmed this week holding up walking in the street. I mean, how contrived can you get? They don't even have her sitting at a fucking cafe table that might look slightly more realistic. No. Walking in the street holding Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto. A billionaire. Right. What do you think that is, folks? Can we work it out? Can we connect the dots? That's because she wants everybody of her own age group, all her fans and all the other millennials looking like her, right? To Karl Marx, she's reading Karl Marx, I'm going to get some Karl Marx. That's all it is. Now, why would that be?
Well, I think we know why that is.
Yeah, we do. We do. So there you are. Now, that's just an example of the whole communization of the, you know, and I'm always posting the books from fantastic writers like John Stormer. None dare call it education. We've done something on, to refer to your earlier point, we've got what's her name, who did the book Death of the Grown Up. Can't remember her name right now. We've done a whole podcast on that. Type that into Unslaved and watch it. That, you know, over 60% of males are now living at home with mom because of the breakdown of the masculinity and the heroism that mom pretty much wanted for her son anyway, you know, if you get into the psychological point of view. But just as a stats now, it's appearing to actually haunt the stats. In Italy, it's 80% of grown men over 30 are sitting on those video games and sitting there, you know, with the remote controls, and they've given up.
Yikes.
Now, is that the Frankfurt School operating? If you ask me, I go, yeah, it is. But nobody like the Frankfurt School or Tavistock or whoever these orgs are could ever achieve that solution, those incredible successes that they have, without, as I've continually said through my career, knowing what you don't know, and that is the psyche, the temperament, the armoring, right? They know about Reich, they know about Freud, they know about Jung, and you don't, and that's why you can have a prison planet. And if you're a well-meaning Christian, you know, narrator on these subjects, like say an Alex Jones and others I could mention, yeah, I get it. You're good. You do some really great work, but because you're a Christian, you don't want anything to do with psychology. So you're not going to get very far. Your tank will not go over the hill. I celebrate you for some of the, you know, the walls that you have broken down and you've thrashed through some of the lies. That's great, but your wheels are going to be in the rut very soon because Christians, by definition, are anti-psychological. None of them can afford to be psychological because that's the end of their whole dogma in Christianity. Finito, unless they move into something, you know, more deep, of an esoteric kind of Christianity, and I'm much more, you know, open to that. But they're not. They're dogmatic. They're fundamentalistic. This is a demon that's also haunting America in reaction to everything that's happening now. These leftist plonkers. You realize that one of the reactions to that is even worse. Can people fathom this? That there's an extreme right, very, very wealthy. We're talking Mormons. We're talking Jehovah's Witnesses. We're talking descendants of all of that original Puritanism, which is one of the fucking foulest pestilences on this earth. Well, that's waiting in the wings with its billions. If and when the people genuinely say, okay, we're done with this leftist stuff. It's totally desecrative. It's completely anarchistic and anarchic. We were wrong to experiment with this. And there are precedents, by the way, in history for this. And then what comes in to replace it? Fundamental evangelism, which we're not going to explore its pestilences here. I'm just saying, yeah, they burn people with Motorhead t-shirts. They burn the bands. They ban rock and roll. Yeah, Elvis, yeah, his hips. Let's not film that from the waist up kind of thing. Yeah. banning rock and roll, telling rock and roll bands can have on stage. Texas banned, the Rolling Stones concerts. If they said, if you ever show that, balloon phallus, that's it, mate. We're coming in. They're going to fucking close down the whole concert. Things like that. These are recent history. Busting people, beating them up. Even, I'm not just talking about rock and roll or heavy metal. I'm talking about rockabilly. I'm talking about, pop. That can happen. That can actually happen. It's waiting in the wings. It's part of the sort of counter reaction, or whatever you want to call it. The flip side of the kind of extreme liberalism and diversity we have now. That can end, people. It's not good in itself, but it has an opposite. It has Tweedledum and Tweedledee mechanisms. And these Tavistock people are very clever to wheel in out one and wheel in another in the endless round of historical manipulation and geopolitics that they've done for centuries. And I don't see anybody talking about that. In fact, I'm not worried, because I'm actually seeing a lot of people online now actually vindicating, these Christian fanatics, and almost saying that is the solution. People who should know better. You see,
That's
so
quite shocking.
Yeah, it is completely. And do you think they're going to allow you to have a gnome in your garden? They'll burn you as a witch. Do you think they're going to let you go? You practice astrology? They put a brick through your window. You think they're going to have a crystal shop or any new? They'll burn you and the books with it. That's what's waiting in the wings. That hasn't gone away. That whole narrative hasn't gone. If a strong leader turns up and says, Bible in hand and flaming cross in the other, how many? If people doubt me, they just have to think back to the Bush era, when there was constant reference to how many, evangelists there were in America and how they supported Bush and God. People forgetting that? They were giving statistics of unimaginable, levels to talk about the people who were supporting Bush and how Christianized they were. Do we forget that group is there? I'm not demonizing these people altogether, but as a mass movement in the geopolitical sense, that's about as irrational and dogmatic and as fundamentalistic as you can get. And it is even worse than the kind of nightmare we're seeing today. These are the realities. You have to pull out from the canvas and remember, you don't want to bring your Hegels in. You don't want to find these happy mediums, and you don't want to work with any of those theories. You don't want to work with the universe and the moral universe. And you're afraid of below, which is the deep unconscious, which has a threatening mode, as we said. May not be threatening in itself, but in terms of the upper structures, it can be seen as a danger. It has admixture of corrosives. You see, that want to bring down the upper structures of differentiation and individualism. Yeah, so we have a deep fear of that, and it shows up in people's dreams. And you have fear of above as well, above the differentiated state, and which would be the moral universe that has no human stain on it. It's the pure crystalline, real noumena, right? Right. So what does Joe Stickback do? Crushed in the middle. Well, he signs on for post-humanism, cybernetics, right? Just fix me bionically so I don't feel. Right? Remember in the Reichian Reich would say, I know what that's all about. Hardened bodies. The robot is your hardened body. There's no robots or cyborgs. It's you with a completely stiffened pathological armoring, an emotional plague, which, as we said, blocks what? Feeling. Well, the cyborg, I cannot feel anymore. I feel just marvelous, like the movie Equilibrium and others have shown. I'm no longer troubled by human emotions. And you have the steely crust to keep out the reality principle, because that also is a threat. That's the organic. That's the real. That's the percept as opposed to the concept. So that's where we're going to end up. And there's some very clever Marcusean people who are way showing this, who pipering us into exactly that super armored state where feeling does not bother us from the inside and reality does not really bother from the outside, because we never leave the building. There's no open windows. I just live in this big corporate tower. It's got everything I want. Or I live in a yacht, right, where all the doors are closed and the air conditioning is just perfect, and we've got everything laid on. We got a gym, we got a cinema, we got a whorehouse. I mean, this is just marvelous. I just park my car underneath and live in here. You want to know that these buildings already exist, these extopias as they're called? We want it. That armored building and that armored skyline is exactly the replica of the armored body. What happened to Wilhelm Reich, the man who pointed all this out? Died in a stockade. Others have been put in lunatic asylums. Wilhelm Reich, the man we're talking about, is the first man in American history to have his books burned. So while you're saluting the flag, just remember that America is the first. They're telling you everywhere, Nazis burning books. Well, wait a minute, they must be closer to home than you thought. And you know what they burned the books of Wilhelm Reich for? Healing people. They don't want you healed. They don't want you in a good state. And so this running you ragged from one political, extreme to the other is a way to keep, I've expressed recently in memes that, the fear porn of the alternative movement has become worse of a plague and a pestilence than the pandemic, than the people in the CDC and Club of Rome, whether they planned on this or not, or it came as an unhappy happy phenomena. The fear porn does more damage on your consciousness than any threat of any vaccine.
Well, I mean, that whole thing even came into fruition because of the fear, we could say.
Yes, it did. But if you really know your psychology, you'll know that there's much more fear, mental breakdown in the fear porn than there is actually in the other. I know people think the opposite. I'm the only one stating this, that the fear porn about what big government is going to do to you affects your limbic centers far more than any actual governmental interference or invasion. It's police yourself tactics, which George Orwell and other people did warn us, but they turned over the pages. So as I say, America is incapable. That's why I fortify my, somewhat, controversial statements. I can fortify it. I can qualify it because you can see that these dynamics exist. People, intelligent people, haven't worked out the very things we've just talked about in this last minute, and that shows me that's a gauge. Take a temperature or take a pulse, and I don't like what I see. You guys can't work out that the police yourself, the watchdog across the street, the neighbor, the teacher, the guy in the white coat down at the clinic, and so on and so on. The guy at the pizza place who won't let you in and all this. You don't see, or when you go online, the well-meaning people who are meant to be fighting government tyranny are actually spreading, and I can name them. We could sit here for the next hour. I could keep naming them. They've all fallen into this trap. And the reason why, and then the final point I want to make is the reason why all of these people, whether it's David Icke or Alex Jones and all the rest of the horde of them, haven't got it right, Sarah, is because they're not worked psychologically. I don't give a fuck if they're members of New Age movement. They got a whole book. They got every book Eckhart Tolle ever wrote on their shelf, or fucking Oprah Winfrey, or how many crystals they got around their necks. Yeah, they are not psychologically worked people. Far, far from it. In fact,
well, dissociated.
That is a judgment. That is a judgment. But I have to make it because we've got to get the facts out. They're well-meaning people. I'm not telling you that they're evil or anything like that. But by being psychologically unworked, they are bound to pick up other paradigms and hand them to you as solutions. But unfortunately, those are boast. They're not good solutions because they themselves can't see the solutions because they are not interested in psychology. And I've tried to tell that same audience for the best part of 21 years now, don't leave consciousness at the door. And that's exactly what they've done.
Well, it's a good thing there's people like you out there, Michael. I think this is actually a great place to wrap things up because you're bringing things full circle with what you've just said. The solution is individuation. I mean, it's bringing online the Imperial Self, having the balls to just fucking do it. Like, pardon my language, but it's my channel, so I guess I can swear at least once. But anyway, that's what it is. And part of bringing the Imperial Self online, purely bringing that online, is going within the body. It's understanding your psychology. It's understanding how your inner world operates so that you can bring forth through your actions what is intrinsic to you, so that you're not just another robot, so that you're not just an armored being, and so that you're not just some kind of automaton that's running on fear. Right? Like, that's not what we're here to do. Everyone has the choice. So if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But I know if you're on my channel and if you follow Michael, that I'm pretty sure that you're a little bit more aware of where the value in life lies. And so I just want to say before we part, Michael has a few places that you can access his wonderful content. He has a lot of very valuable information to share via his website. Michael, could you share your links for everybody?
Yeah, sure. Go to michaeltsarion.com or msar for short.com. And that will be a sort of a navigation page to other sites like Unslaved, where we have the podcast, Dragon Mother, and sites like that. And even on msar.com, there's also a link at the top to articles. that are pretty much pertinent to everything we've been talking about, because I like to approach the same subject matter from many different angles: psychology, sociology, philosophy, as well as just sort of common sense. And then there's also a conspiratorial angle, because in my work, I never forget that any of the things that we've spoken about are co-opted by the higher priesthoods, these priesthood of the elites or the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, the Black Lodge. They have their own history too, and they're very adept at manipulating the psychology, because they know it and we don't. So yeah, msard.com. And then the podcasts, we've done some very good ones recently on unslaved.com.
Yeah, definitely check those out. Definitely check them out. And I have a rehab coming up starting October 12th. If you're interested in joining that, you can check out my website. It's adeptguidance.com /rabbit dash or sorry, spiritual dash rabbit dash hole dash rehab. The link's on the main page, so you just scroll down to the bottom. And what that whole rehab is about is getting unhooked from the collective consciousness and the insanity of the New Age spiritual movement, the law of attraction movement, and all of these silly things, because you're here to individuate. You are here to be you, and you cannot become the Imperial Self until you get your ass into rehab. All right, so check out my website, check out Michael's links, and thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great one.